the section uh, from F5, F5 performance management. So the topics that are covered here in section A of our syllabus, all of them will pick them up from performance management, because the examination pattern is case study pattern. So the case studies also will take from the exam kit. First section is cost analysis for competitive advantage. So first topic today we are going to start with ABC, activity based costing. One classification of cost is based on identifiability. You must have studied in your BCom program or graduation program, but let's just quickly revise. What is the normal practice in the organizations in terms of recording the cost? So, one type of classification is based on the identifiability. The costs are classified as direct cost and indirect cost. So if the cost is identified with the cost object, the cost object could be anything, like it could be a product, process, department, unit, function, group of people. It could be anything. If a cost can be attached to a cost object, then we call that to be as a direct cost. Then the cost that cannot be identified with the cost object, we call them as indirect cost. That's one classification of cost. Like for example, if we talk about the product that is produced as a cost object, some of the cost can be attached to the product, like the material that is used for making only that product, the labor costs that are incurred, etc. There are many costs that are not identified, or it cannot be very easily attached. Like suppose, for example, factory rent is there. So factory rent, if it has to be attached to the product, it is not simple. There are multiple things to be taken into consideration. What are the other activities that are carried on in the factory premises? How much space does the production work of that particular product occupies? And then some way it has to be allocated. Suppose there is a supervisor, how much time the supervisor devotes to a particular to the activity of producing a particular product. So likewise, when we see that there are multiple um, items which cannot be directly attached, all of them are grouped together, we call them as overheads. The costs that can be easily attached or identified with the cost object, we call them as direct cost. Cost object could be anything, but here in this case, we are just referring to if production of a product is a cost object, some of the costs can be attached to the product, some of the costs are not easy to be attached. It is not easy to be divided and distributed. So the traditional cost accounting, what does it do? See, the cost sheet has the format of cost sheet is, we see that first direct material is accounted for, then we see that direct labor is accounted, then comes direct expenses. The sum total of all these three is called as, when we add them up, it is called as prime cost. Your cost sheet, just recollect that. This is called as prime cost. Now, to the prime cost, the other costs that are indirect in nature, but then they are not accounted or they are not recorded as indirect material, indirect labor, indirect expenses, but rather now the overhead costs that are incurred are now accounted based on the functions of the business. So to the prime cost, first we would be adding the factory overheads, those costs that cannot be identified with the cost object, those costs that cannot be identified with the cost object, but they are incurred in the factory premises. So factory overheads, like multiple things are there: power, electricity, maintenance, repairs, coal, gas, water, fuel, indirect materials, cleaning charges, supervision charges, etc. So there is a big list of items that come under factory overheads. So we add this, and this is called as works cost. And then to this, then later on we see that administration, selling and distribution overheads are added. Now that is the procedure, administration and the selling and distribution. So we are not getting into the intricacies of how the cost sheet is prepared, etc. But we understand that there are indirect costs that are incurred, but the normal practice, the traditional cost accounting, does not divide and distribute each item based on whatever is the basis of apportionment. Rather, it groups all of them together and in one go, with one simple calculation, the overhead costs are allocated. So something like a past um, from the past sheets, the performance of the that happened in the previous periods. So from those previous cost sheets, some kind of a relationship is established. Some kind of a relationship is established in the sense the all the items of factory overhead are calculated based on a predetermined basis. Usually we see that factory overheads are calculated as a percentage of direct labor. That is, in the previous period, so whatever was the direct labor, so this direct labor is assumed to be as 100%. So in that period, whatever was the factory overhead, this factory overhead, what was that percentage? So it is converted into a percentage or a predetermined overhead basis is calculated, and some percentage would be calculated here. That is brought to the future periods. Every time factory overheads has to be calculated, this factory overhead is calculated as a percentage of direct labor. Anyway, direct labor would be known because there is identifiability with the product. So how much is the amount of direct labor anyway would be known. Therefore, taking that into account and the predetermined overhead rate, whatever was calculated earlier in the previous period, that would be brought forward and it would be applied here. It is not the actual amount. See, it may be drastically very different from if it was compared, if it was to be compared with the actual overhead amount incurred. But that's a normal practice. That's the conventional way of accounting, because it is a time consuming process of allocating multiple items of factory overheads. The some of the items when I have listed out only that ran into so many items. So instead of doing the calculation in a lengthy manner for so many items, so then um, in one go for the factory overheads, a predetermined overhead rate is calculated, and that will be applied henceforth. So every time they account for factory overheads, so factory overheads would be as a predetermined overhead mm, rate applied on direct labor. There are other practices also, like sometimes machine hours is taken, sometimes prime cost is taken, but the most commonly used method is direct labor cost. Okay. Um, what happens when such a thing is the practice? If the overheads are calculated based on predetermined overhead rate, it would not be the actual amount of overhead that should be charged to the product. See, one of the objectives of cost accounting is to determine what is the cost per unit. The selling price per unit has to be determined, so appropriate cost per unit has to be calculated, then selling price per unit can be determined. If the cost per unit is not properly charged, let's say if it is decided at a higher value, cost per unit, now here it is all based on an assumption they are calculating. If this is not an appropriate one, a higher amount of overhead cost is allocated, cost per unit will be high. When cost per unit is high, selling price per unit also would be automatically, it would be high. If the selling price per unit is high, then in that case, the customers may shift to competitors' products. They may lose on their demand. If the cost price is low, let's say they have applied lesser amount of overhead cost, so cost per price per unit is low, then selling price per unit also will be decided at a lower value. So in that case also the business faces a loss, because sometimes this selling price or the revenue that is generated from the sale of the product may not be sufficient enough to recover the costs that are incurred. Now, here the traditional method of cost accounting is charges the factory overheads based on direct labor. Administrative, selling and distribution overheads are charged based on works cost. So there is a problem here. What we see, these are all based on some assumptions. Why would it go wrong if we look into that? So, for example, see if under factory overheads, we may have items like machine repairs, machine maintenance, something to do with equipment, etc. Welfare charges. Are they anyway connected to direct labor? Some of them, some of the items are absolutely no way connected to direct labor. So in that case, estimating those items based on direct labor cost is absolutely not appropriate. Okay. So if that is the case, then the overheads that are charged to the products based on some predetermined overhead rates can result in wrong allocation or wrong charging of overhead cost to the products. If wrong charging happens, it could result in over applying or under applying of the overheads. Over applying or under applying of the overheads, um, then that also can create a problem, because by over applying the overhead, selling price will be high. Then they may lose the demand to the customers. If the overheads applied are low, selling price would be low, then selling price will not be able to recover all the costs that are incurred. So we see that there are certain limitations with traditional cost accounting. So then we see that there is an alternate solution that is provided called as ABC. See here we see that the traditional costing system, also called as absorption costing, charges overheads to products based on an hourly absorption rate or some rate, predetermined overhead rate. So based on some rate, the overhead costs are allocated. Okay. What is the problem with that? Just now I have discussed. See, the issues with that would be, it would not be appropriate allocation of overhead. So the determination of selling price also would be wrong, and that also has negative consequences. So ABC comes out with the suggestion. The suggestion says that the overhead should be charged based on the charges overheads to products on a casual basis using cost drivers. So what does it mean by cost drivers? There are steps that are um, set for the ABC, activity based costing system, or the principles of ABC follow these steps when the overhead costs are allocated. What are overhead costs? Overhead costs are those costs that cannot be identified with the cost object or with the production of a product. So those are um, direct costs. Indirect costs, if they are identified, we call them as direct costs. If they are not identified, we call them as indirect costs or overhead costs. Overhead costs. See, overhead costs, when they have to be charged, see, ABC suggests that first, for all the overheads, what are the major activities for which these costs are incurred? Identify the activities. Why are the overhead costs incurred? What are the major activities for which these overhead costs are incurred? So that has to be first identified. First one, step number one, identify major activities. Second, after we identify the activities, like activities could be power supply, activities could be assembling of the components, assembling of different parts, or when material has to be provided, material requisition, orders are fulfilled. So repairs, maintenance, power supply, etc. These are all activities for which the overhead costs are incurred. So identify all these activities. For each activity, whatever is the amount that is incurred, that is all pooled up under an activity cost pool. So every time there is a cost incurred for repairs and maintenance, pull it up under repairs and maintenance. And every time there is a cost incurred for, let's say, power, so under the cost pool called as power, the costs are accumulated. After that, along with the accumulation of the cost, for each item of cost, each activity of cost, there should be a suitable cost driver. Basically, in simple terms, what is cost driver is the basis of apportionment. If we talk about power, for example, if we talk about power, how many units of power was consumed by each product? So that will become the number of units of power consumed becomes the basis of apportionment. Let's say repairs, number of repairs that were required to produce each product um, will become the basis of apportionment. So identify a suitable cost driver. It should be suitable to the nature of activity for which the overheads are incurred. So identify a suitable cost driver. Cost driver in the sense basis of apportionment, which would be used to divide and distribute the overhead cost. So after the cost drivers are identified, anyway, all the overheads that are incurred with respect to that activity are pulled up in activity cost pool. And finally, we see that charge cost to units of production based on cost driver volumes. So using these cost drivers, the total amount that was accumulated in the cost pools, using the cost drivers, they would be charged to the products. So these are the 4 steps under activity-based costing. Is this basic preliminary introduction clear? Do you understand the factors?
Yes,
You must have done in cost accounting cost estimate sheet. So
yeah, yes, ma'am.
okay, so that, see, ease of doing that is very good. Very easily the cost can be applied to the product. So but it has its own limitations that it can result in over applying or under applying of overheads that can have negative consequences. That is, they may lose the demand to other competitors, or the revenue generated may not be sufficient to recover all the costs. So therefore, activity-based costing. So activity-based costing suggests that first identify all the activities for which the overhead costs are incurred. For each activity, identify a suitable cost driver. Accumulate all the costs that are incurred for each activity under cost pools. Finally, divide and distribute the overhead costs that were pooled up in cost pools using the cost drivers. Okay, so that's the concept basically. Since your examination pattern is case study pattern, I will not do any objective type questions, but we'll straight away take up a case study and then do that. See how are the costs, the see, in case of traditional costing, only one predetermined overhead rate would be calculated. But here in ABC, as many number of activities are there, that many number of activity rates have to be calculated. Either we calculate rates or we use the basis of apportionment and allocate that. That we can see. So as many number of overheads are incurred, then that many number of overhead rates have to be calculated. Okay. Why are traditional overhead absorption rates less reliable? Okay. First, let's do one question and then come back and do the theoretical aspects about ABC. So I'll put you to a case study here on the screen. There is a case study here on the screen, Gadget company. The Gadget company produces three products: A, B, and C, all made from the same material. Until now, it has used traditional absorption costing to allocate overheads to its products. The company is now considering an activity based costing in the hope that it will improve profitability. Then we see information for the three products for the last year is as follows. So we have the details as production and sales, selling price per unit, raw material usage per unit, direct labor hours per unit, machine hours per unit, number of production runs per annum, number of purchase orders per annum, number of deliveries to retailers per annum. The price of raw materials remained constant throughout the year at 1.20 per kg. Similarly, the direct labor cost for the whole workforce was 14.80 per hour. The annual overhead costs were as follows. So we see machine setup cost, machine running cost, procurement cost, delivery cost. So the list of costs that are given are all indirect in nature. So these are overheads. So 4 activities and 4 overhead costs are incurred. The question says, calculate the full cost per unit for products A, B, and C under traditional absorption costing. We are asked to do calculate it using the traditional cost accounting system, and the basis of apportionment is direct labor hours as the basis of apportionment. Then we are also asked to calculate the full cost per unit of each product using the ABC, activity based costing. Using your calculation from A and B above, explain how ABC may help the gadget company improve its improve the profitability of each product. So let's take this question to Excel file. One second. Just let me paste the question there in Excel file. First bit, it says calculate the full cost per unit for products ABC under the traditional absorption costing system. What's the traditional absorption costing system? It is based on the direct labor hours. Okay, let's see. There are three products A, B, C. We have the production and sales volume, selling price, raw material, direct labor, machineries, number of production runs per annum, number of purchase orders per annum, number of deliveries. After that, we have a list of costs that are given. The price for raw material remained constant throughout the year at 1.20 per kg. Similarly, the direct labor cost for the whole workforce was 14.80 per hour. The annual overhead costs were as follows. We see machine setup costs, machine running costs, procurement costs, and delivery costs. So we have a list of overhead costs that are incurred. This has to be apportioned based on calculate the full cost per unit using the traditional costing using labor hours as the base. So we need to know how many labor hours were used that these costs can be allocated um, to these three products based on the labor hours. Do we know how many labor hours were required uh, for the production of all the three products? We see that labor hour per unit is given. The labor hours that were required per unit, but they have produced just not one unit, but produced 15,000 units of A, 12,000 units of B, 18,000 units of C. So what's the requirement of labor hours? So let's first understand that. So there are three products A, B, and to calculate the labor hours, because labor hours is the basis for us to apportion the overhead cost. First, we see direct labor hours per unit. 0.1, 0.15, 0.2. The total direct labor hours. So altogether, total is, if we add them up, there are totally 6,900 hours of direct labor used in the production of these trucks. The total number of direct labor hours altogether are 6,900. Now, overheads have to be calculated. Overheads have to be charged to product A, B, C. How many overhead costs are there? So we see machine setup cost is there, machine running cost is there, procurement cost is there, delivery cost. There are four items of overheads. Okay, let's start. We have a list of them. I am not writing the titles. I'll just write the figures here. So you also know what are the items. So add them up. If there are 6,900 hours required to produce all three products and the total overhead cost is 195 270, what is the cost per hour? The calculation. So that's 28.3. So now using 28.3 per hour, allocate the overhead cost to products A, B, C based on direct labor hours. First question is just not about the overheads, but it says that calculate the full cost per unit. We need to calculate what is full cost per unit. So for full cost, we would have so full cost means we see material cost is there, labor cost is there. After that, the production items are there. Okay. So let's first write what is direct material or raw material. Raw material usage per unit is 2 kgs per unit. So it will go as 2 into 15,000. So here we see that The direct labor hours per unit are 0.1. So 0.1 into
15,000. 15,000, no?
okay. No, cost we should know, no? That is per number of hours, no? 0.1
What?
is number of hours. This also, I think, this is also kgs per unit, not cost per unit. No? The price for raw material remained constant throughout the year at 1.20 per kg. So requirement is they require this many number of kgs, 2 kgs into 50,000 into we also have the cost per kg raw material. So it will again go into 1.2. Okay. After the direct labor, the direct labor cost for the whole workforce was 14.80 per hour. So direct labor cost is also given to us. 14.80. So why so many things? We already have the direct labor hours. No? It's equal to this into 14.80. Then comes now the overhead. Overhead cost. Overhead cost, the rate is given as 28.3. So now 28.3 into that many number of labor hours. So is equal to add them up to find out what's the full cost. The question says, okay, full cost per unit. Full cost per unit will be this divided by the total number of units. Now comes the second bit says calculate the full cost per unit using ABC. So let's start with this one, B. Full cost per unit using ABC. Now, how many items are there? There are four items of overhead. So first, let's start with finding out what is the overhead cost, because there are four items. So for each one of them, the apportionment of overhead cost should be based on the cost driver. So first, let's finish off with the calculation of overhead cost. Then we can prepare the statement to find out what is the full cost per unit. So statement showing allocation of overhead cost. There are three products. So for each of them, first the item of overhead. Let's list out them. Machine setup. Then we have machine running. Then we have procurement cost. Then we have delivery cost. For each of these items, the amounts are given. Now we need to allocate them based on the cost drivers. So we need to identify what are the cost drivers. So for machine setup, machine running, procurement, delivery, from the details that are provided to us, we need to choose the cost driver. Based on what would these amounts be allocated? So that's the point. So if we are talking about machine setup, we have two items related to machine setup, machine running. Here in this list, selling price, direct material, direct labor, machine hours per unit, number of production runs per annum, purchase orders per annum, number of deliveries to retailers per annum. So out of that, if we look into that, deliveries will go to delivery cost. So if the basis of apportionment has to be selected, the driver has to be selected. See, it should be a suitable one. So delivery cost will go based on the number of deliveries to retailers per annum. If we talk about procurement, procurement is purchase of material, procuring the material from the supplier. So procurement, this will go to number of purchase orders. Then now we have machine setup cost and then machine running cost. So there are two items related to machine. So can you relate to machine setup cost? What will be the basis of apportionment or the cost driver? And for machine running cost, what will it be? Logically, you think, because two items, both of them are related to machine. So how would we take that?
Ma'am, number of purchase order, huh?
Purchase orders is for procurement.
Okay,
Procurement
okay.
and purchase orders. Purchase
Yeah.
orders for procurement. Procurement means purchasing only, no?
Yeah,
So,
yes.
so for
Next,
these two items are there. See,
number of production runs per annum
production runs per
or
annum will be for
machine running cost.
running is the number of hours it was run. Machine ran for that many number of hours. So that way we can connect it. Machine setup is the number of productions. See, machine setup cost the number of production runs that took place. The machine was run for how many number of hours? So machine hours would go as an appropriate one.
Okay, okay.
Okay. So let's write these items here. First, we have the overhead cost. Then cost driver. For the first amounts are 26,550. Cost driver is number of production runs per annum. 66,400. Number of machine hours. Next is 48,000. The basis is number of purchase orders. After that, delivery cost, number of deliveries to retailers. Number of deliveries. The amount is 54,320. So we have the overhead cost, we have the cost drivers, and these costs have to be allocated now to products A, B, and C. Okay, so we can straight away have it here in this statement: A, B, and C. The overhead cost is 26,550. I'll pull this down. We can have the details side by side. Okay. The total number of total amount of machine setup cost is 26,550. This should be allocated based on, we saw number of production runs per annum. Number of production runs per annum are 16, 12, and 8. So in this ratio, it would be allocated. So we can allocate it in the ratio 16 is to 12 is to 8. So how do we calculate? 16 is to 12 is to 8. 16 plus this is 20, 36. So 16 by 36 into 26,500. Now we see the overheads for next one is machine running cost. Machine running costs are based on machine hours per unit, 0.5. No, this is per annum, this is per unit. So a lot of calculation has to be done. These are all per annum, but this is per unit. I'm doing the machine hours required, the total production. We see there are three products A, B, C, A, B, C. Machine hours per unit. Machine hours per unit given is 0.1. Then we have 0.15. I mean, you know, 0.5. I'm really sorry. This is 0.5, not 0.1, 0.5. Then we have the 0.7, 0.9. The strength is like this only for my class, or other classes also we see the same strength?
Same, ma'am.
Whenever it is my class, I don't see students there in the class.
Same, ma'am. Almost like only 2 or 3.
Right? They're very confident to study on their own.
I have no idea, ma'am.
Total machine hours. I mean, generally it is observed that the question paper would not be complete without an ABC question. A case study, generally a case study would be found in the paper if I'm talking from F5 point of view. So it is very important topic. So if this is there in A section, the chances of this being tested for case study is very high. Because there are other topics, those things also can be tested for a case study pattern question. But ABC always will take, I mean, it would be considered for a examination pattern question. It's not so much about theoretical, but there's a lot of calculation which we have to do. So the calculation wise, it is lengthy, but once the logic is clear, I don't think it is any difficult. So now the number of mesh nodes, we have it as 7,500, 8,400. So we will be taking this as the basis and allocate the overhead cost. So total number of hours are 32,100. So if A has to be allocated with the machine running cost, so we see that it is 7,500 divided by 32,100. This is the fraction into amount is 66,400. $8,400 divided by, proportionately we have to have this, into the amount is 66,400. Did I put this bracket earlier? Okay, like this I wrote. Now comes procurement cost. Now procurement cost, So the reason why I have done this one is the production and sales volume per unit. This is given per annum. We see number of production runs are per annum, purchase orders are per annum, deliveries are per annum, but machine hours are not per annum. Machine hours are given as per unit. Therefore, there was a need for us to make these machine hours also per annum. What is the requirement? Then only we can take it. Otherwise, directly take this ratio of 0.5 is to 0.7 is to 0.9, it would not be appropriate because the total number of machine hours per annum, because all the others are also per annum. The costs that are incurred are also per annum. Therefore, the machine hours requirement also should be made to per annum basis. After we make it as per annum, then it becomes appropriate that we use the basis of apportionment to allocate the cost. So that is the logic behind that. I hope it is clear. Next
Yes,
one
ma'am.
is procurement. So procurement cost is 48,000. The number of purchase orders are per annum. So we can take these things 24, 28, 42. So total would be 40, 60, 70, 94. Total is 94. So the cost is 48,000 into 24 by 94. Next comes delivery cost. Deliveries, number of deliveries are 48, 30, and 62. So this is 78, 80, 140. Total parts are 140 is equal to 54,320 into 48 divided by 140. Divided by 1. Let's find out the total overhead cost. Now we are asked to find out what is full cost per unit. So full cost per unit, I'll insert it here only. Just now here we have done the direct material, direct labor cost. So let's pick them from here. So, now for the overhead cost. Since we've already calculated, from there we'll bring it here. Find out what's the total cost. This is the full cost. Number of units. Okay. So this is full cost per unit based on activity based costing. So 7.76, 10.17, 12.48. A and B, two bits we have done. Third one, using your calculation from A and B above, explain how activity based costing may help the gadget company improve profitability of each product. So how can the profitability of each product be improved? So that's a 6 marks question. How do we address this one? See, from the calculation just now, when we compare these things also, we can see that there is a difference here. For A, under traditional costing, it is 6.71. Here it is 7.76. Here it is 10.06. It's 10.17, 13.42, and 12.48. We see that the cost per unit for all three products are different. See, we do not see any matching of the cost per unit under both these methods. See, some of them, the cost is undercharged under traditional costing. See, ABC is appropriate because it is using the appropriate cost drivers to allocate that. So the correct usage based on that, the costs are charged. Traditional costing system is using a predetermined overhead rate. It is based on some assumption that the labor cost is taken as the basis, but we see that out of that, some of them are absolutely not connected to labor, like machine setup, machine running, procurement. So we see that these are not related to direct labor. So it is based on some assumption that the overheads are charged. So how can the profitability be increased? So what can you do? How do you present the answer? While presenting the answer in a statement format for A, B, C, what are the costs? First, you can write. Let's put B also. Let's put this one. Um, I'm just writing it here. Later on, I'll drag it down to C bit because the data is all available here. So I will write it here. Full cost per unit. This one is using ABC. This one is additional costing. If it were just 2 or 3 marks that are allotted to this particular question, if it says that explain how the profitability can be improved using ABC. In a generic sense, if the question was asked, maybe 2 marks or 3 marks are allotted. So you can talk about, see, some of the products they are undercharged. So I think appropriate cost should be allocated. So in a generic sense, for all the three products, some of the products it is undercharged, some of them overcharged. So what has to be done? But 6 marks is, which means that for each bit, 2 marks will be allotted. logically, if we look into that, if 6 marks are allotted, 3 products are there. So each product will carry 2 marks. So after you write this particular table, then give the heading as product A. So product A, compare that. What was the cost? So 6.71. It is undercharged. If it is undercharged, wherein it has to be 7.76. Because of undercharging, the price also would be lower. So they would be losing the profit to that extent. Then go to then what has to be done for product A? Product A, the overhead cost should be appropriately allocated, and then the price has to be decided. B is also undercharged, so slightly lesser, um, but C is overcharged. So write again product C heading. Then you say it is overcharged by this. So if it is overcharged, the selling price also would be higher. And as a result of that, there is a possibility that the demand would be lost to other competitors. And that is what you have to explain. 3 categories. Otherwise, if it was just 2 to 3 marks, only one category, finish it off. But 6 marks, product A, product B, product C headings you write, and then explain whatever it is. So how can you improve the profitability of each product? Talk about that. Okay.